everybody, welcome back to the channel. We've got another Classic Reads episode today, and today we're going to be looking at Baby is 3 by Theodore Sturgeon. With me again is Mark Tiedemann. So welcome to the channel again, Mark, and we give us a little bit of background on Theodore Sturgeon and Baby is 3.
Ted Sturgeon, Theodore Sturgeon. It is said that Ted Sturgeon had one thing he wanted to write about, and that was love. And when you look over his catalog, it is surprising how often that was the main theme of most of his stories, even though it manifested in some particularly strange ways. Baby is 3 is one of them, because there's a level of devotion innate in the principles of the story that in a way you can only define as love, but not the usual sort of fictive, surface love, but this is a deep commitment. And the proliferation of characters in it is interesting for its time. It was published in the October 1952 issue of Galaxy magazine, and very quickly became one of the most popular novelettes or novellas, however you want to count the wordage, of the period. He got oodles of anthology requests, and there were even motion picture offers coming from a variety of places, including from Orson Welles. I get the impression that Orson Welles really, really, really wanted to make a science fiction movie, because he did the same thing to Asimov, and there were a number of others. He never was able to get the funding for it, or which, unfortunately for Orson Welles, that was true for many of his projects. After Citizen Kane, he became kind of a quasi-blacklisted person in Hollywood, and he always had to scramble for any kind of funding. But yeah, apparently he'd made an offer to make a movie out of Baby is 3. I have no idea how he would have done it in the 50s and make it sell. He did, however.
Yeah, I can see maybe doing it now, but it would be like a really long art kind of piece. Lots of close-ups and looking at, having the actors do a lot of just thinking and reacting and having, not a lot of talking, I guess. But so you'd have to have an audience that was willing to kind of go that kind of sort of arty flow with it. Yeah, because it's a lot of people discovering themselves on the inside, right? So
basically, it's a very long conversation.
Not fights, not action. There's some violence, but I mean, mostly it's internal.
And he did rewrite the ending when he expanded it into a novel.
Okay.
In the form you find in the novel More Than Human, which won him a fantasy award, Miss Q does die. He changed that to make it connect more plausibly with the bookend pieces that he wrote. But I think that the original novella is striking for a number of reasons. When you put it in the context of when it was published, 1952, that was still a time when nobody expected any kind of literary quality from science fiction. Ted Sturgeon always exhibited a fine sense of the literary. He treated his audience as if they had more brains than a lot of other people would think, that their perceptions did not have to be toyed with, that they could be presented with this kind of fantastic material and they just go with it. And then he could put all of his efforts into characterization and theme, which in this case came together. Apparently this was a lifesaver. This was a pivotal book for him, or a pivotal story, later a pivotal book. He himself wrote about it that when he sold the story, it paid a lot of bills which were coming due, and he had just moved to a new house. And then when the novel offer came through, and then all of the anthology offers came through, it kind of put him, this is the one that sort of made his reputation. He had a solid reputation before this, but he wasn't up there with the big 3 or 4 until after Baby is 3. I believe this could only have been published, well, it might have been published by the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, but Horace Gold got it, And Galaxy magazine itself was only 2 years old at this point, and was in the process of shoving Astounding out of the top spot. Sturgeon was one of the writers that Campbell lost, although he never really had a solid grip on him, because Sturgeon kept wanting to write stories about people. Going forward, Sturgeon's oeuvre is of, it rises and falls, but when he was on, he was one of the best writers that we had. As far as the group intelligence that he was describing in there, he used this to do a lot of things. He was talking in this story about child abuse. He was talking about racism. He was talking about unrequited love. He was talking about the foster system in a lot of ways. And he was talking about class all at the same time. And the latent ability in people that you don't expect to have a lot of ability. The narrator, Jerry, turns out to have more ability than even he himself realizes. And he knows he's got a problem. He thinks he just killed somebody who was going to great lengths to take care of him. And interestingly enough, I think for any period, what's his first choice to do? Turn himself into the police, run away? No, he's going to find a psychiatrist. And he's going to figure out why he did what he did. That alone kind of sets the story outside the norms of what you might expect in fiction, because instead of a crime story, which there is a crime in there, you've got a story of self-discovery taken in one of the most remarkable ways. You got the Three Faces of Eve combined with I don't know what else, but in fact, it's interesting. I wonder if the Three Faces of Eve had been published by then, because that movie was based on a book. But it must have landed with a brilliant splash, because here is a science fiction novel that just takes as given that there is telekinesis and teleportation and telepathy, although none of it is exactly manifesting the way it had up to that point been portrayed in science fiction. It has its limits and it has its weirder features here, but the idea that all of these talents are separated from what ought to be a single being that's looking for its head, so to speak, is what makes this story unique, and very well presented. The copy of the collection that you've got up on your screen, that's from the North Atlantic Books. It's the collected short stories of Ted Sturgeon. I believe it's this one that has the introduction by David Crosby. And Crosby, had stated before, and he restates it here, that this life form was what he and Stephen Stills and Graham Nash were striving for when they came together as CSN. They wanted to be able to do this bleshing thing when they were making their music. And when you listen to the harmonies, that's what they were trying to sing each other, so to speak. Makes you wonder how many other artists outside of science fiction that the story inspired. But Sturgeon himself was always looking for alternative relationships. He was an early adopter of a variety of things, some of which could have gotten him thrown in jail at the time. Alternate family arrangements, and he was I think he was a lifelong nudist. Harlan Ellison complained quite a bit that when Ted Sturgeon lived with him, he refused to wear clothes inside the house, which was one thing, but then he'd go answer the door and somebody came. And he kept yelling at him, "Ted, would you put your pants on?" There many writers that Sturgeon affected deeply. Delaney looked upon him as an icon. And then, of course, there's an award named after him. And of course, there's his famous dictum that in science fiction, what you do is you ask the next question. And somebody designed a symbol for that, which was a question mark that ends in an arrow going out, which he had made into a brooch. He wore it. I think you can still get them online. But yeah, that's, there's all kinds of rules for science fiction, how do you do it, etc. But this one, I think, works for all branches of fiction. Ask the next question. But in science fiction in particular, if you're looking at the whys and wherefores of a particular scenario, how do you develop a story out of that? Well, you ask the next question. You have this, what does that imply? And you go there. So
yeah, because when you change the world, you have to think about how all things get changed, right? I mean, in stupid examples, but I mean, if you see like a couple of the later Transformers movies, they've got like these special energon, which is like the kind of energy that Transformers run on, right? But then there's like these energon sensors around the White House, right? Because why, if there are Decepticons out there, why wouldn't you want to detect them, right? Or in the Pacific Rim films, you'll see even the second one where it's supposed to be 10 years after all the kaiju are dead, you still see these big gun emplacements on the top of skyscrapers in these coastal cities. Like they haven't taken the gun emplacements down, and they're pointing out to sea, right? So and the camera just like swings by that little bit of CGI. They don't, no one actually points out, hey, look, we still got guns on top of the, it's just part of the background, and it's like so somebody actually thought, hey, if you've got big monsters coming out of the ocean, what does your city look like, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you got those, even to pop, I guess, SF on, in your summer blockbuster. It's good to think about how did this affect everybody, right?
Yeah, well, that's what, in my opinion, that's the fundamental nature of science fiction, is to examine the changes wrought on people and persons by significant changes in environment/science. And you have to look at it at a very personal level. How are we going to be different? As William Tent put it, how then shall we live? And that's what makes an awful lot of old 40s and 50s science fiction so silly, because you have all this great, wonderful new technology. We can do this, and this, and yet it's a Leave It to Beaver culture. They have changed nothing.
Yeah. There's a great short story, a short. I mean, it's like 1,000 words long, maybe. And I remember the title. So maybe if anybody out there watching remembers like the title or the author of this little piece, let me know. But the first scene is this woman, she's like cleaning her house. It's like the late 40s at this point. And her husband comes in and he's really angry. And she's like, oh, what's up, dear? And he's like, well, I finally figured out time travel, but it's useless. It's useless. And she's like, well, why? He's like, well, you can only go back 30 years and only for 20 minutes. It's completely useless. And then she's thinking to herself, men don't understand the practical nature of anything. And then the next scene is sort of more of a third-person omniscient, where you're looking at the people inside a butcher shop. And this woman is taking her package out of the shop. And the other guy says to the butcher, who is that? And the butcher's like, I don't know. She comes in every week, buys a rack of lamb, 30 cents a pound, never bats an eye.
Yeah, I love it. That sounds familiar, but that sounds like a Frederick Brown story.
It does.
No, he's another one. But Sturgeon, it was in many ways quite remarkable in what he chose to write about, and he was very, very interested in how people relate to each other. And he would break all kinds of rules in order to make a point in the story. And this one was very much a rule breaker. I mean, just the idea that the one character, Lone, who's ostensibly the original head of this superorganism, finds Miss Q And he can't read, so he makes her go find the books and read them so he can take the knowledge out of her head. This may seem like a silly or even a simple idea, but if somebody actually can practice telepathy and has other limitations that we all take for granted, this is a perfectly logical way of researching something. She's going to absorb the essence of what she read, ostensibly, and the precise words are beside the point. She gets the gist of it, and he takes the gist. There are all kinds of little things in this, and he said he wrote it in just a few weeks, the whole story. So must have been a lot of stuff pent up for him to just dump it all into this. And as I say, he changed the ending of this story when he expanded it into a novel. It became the novel More Than Human, and he wrote bookend novellas, beginning and put Baby as 3 in the middle, and he changed the ending so that Miss Q actually does die. I didn't have time to reread the novel before we did this, but I think it was the title of the final novella is Morality. And I think that would probably give him more meat to grind instead of just leaving it the way it was in this, because this has got a relatively happy ending. You know, Jerry's going to go back home, and he and the others are going to do everything they can to make Miss Q's life as nice and wonderful as possible, because she's doing a lot for them. And in the context of the day, she is doing a lot for them. She is really stepping out of her class sentiments and her obvious isolation, because she's very much a recognizable type from that era. The aging spinster is very much a Miss Havisham kind of character, and there is no reason why she would welcome the opportunity to take care of a bunch of kids, particularly within the story. There's 2 black kids in here that she keeps trying to isolate from everybody else, and the kids won't have it because they're not just part of the family, they're part of the being. So he just knocks that down by wearing her down in this one. The other thing that is interesting is that the baby of the title, and it's a curious thing because as you read the story, you reach a point where you wonder if there actually is a baby. It starts to get a little ambiguous in there. But Miss Q tries to send that baby off to a special needs home because she identifies it as a mongoloid. And, well, baby is the central synapse of the group. Without baby, they don't communicate with each other. So they have to have baby back. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff in this story that relates to the wider world, and he's, bringing up social issues. And my read on it is that he wanted to bring them up so that he could knock them down. Mm-hmm. That within the context of this arrangement, none of that is relevant. It is superfluous to the point of a particular kind of family unit staying together.
Well, we see also how the Miss Havisham character ends up alone, too. So her whole isolation, being raised with the sister by a father who won't let them, out of the house, basically.
Yeah.
And then when she ends up with a dead sister and a dead father through various means, then she has to then figure out how to exist on the planet with other people.
Yeah. And then
but she's not part of the being. She is more like the caretaker then for the being.
Yeah. And in a way, she's a victim of the being. Lone uses her without necessarily meaning to, but this is what he has to do to get what he needs. And while Lone doesn't physically touch her, there's a whole raft of subtextual expectations and demands going on in that relationship that leave Miss Q horribly damaged. You get the sense in there that she had been looking for some reason to step outside her shell and be normal, and instead she runs into this guy who doesn't want her in any of the normal ways, and then uses her, and she's already been used once by life in a harsh way. There's multiple tragedies in the story. It's no wonder that it became one of the most anthologized stories that Sturgeon ever wrote, because it operates on several levels. And the psychiatrist, I forgot what a top drawer psychiatrist this guy apparently was. He is a marvel, and based on no one apparently real. Sturgeon said that he created the psychiatrist because this is the one that he wanted and couldn't find.
Huh.
And to a large extent, it was based on Dianetics, because Sturgeon was an early adopter. And like a lot of people in the science fiction community who became entranced with Dianetics early on, he was there for a while and then left. And he took pains to point out at one point, when it was clear that what L. Ron Hubbard had done was not what he'd promised to do in Dianetics. He says, no. Early on, it was just this, and it helped a lot of people. You can take that with a grain of salt, but he realized, like several of them did, that L. Ron Hubbard was a megalomaniac who had other ideas about what to do with this stuff. But there were at that time, and maybe today as well, but I'm not aware of them, but there was this other philosophy called general semantics, which was supposed to be a method of organizing the human mind for top efficiency. And in the 40s and early 50s, it was a big deal. A.E. Van Vogt was an early promoter of general semantics. Even Heinlein for a while thought, hey, this is some cool stuff. But there were a number of these very science fictional notions that were being presented in quasi-scientific, semi-philosophical format to create a new kind of human that would step into the future and be, more than human. And we've forgotten about all that, with necessarily so, because things superseded and there's always crackpot ideas. But it just goes to show you that even a crackpot idea can generate good fiction. You can take some of this stuff and say, no, of course it doesn't work, it's all nonsense, but look what I wrote using some of these ideas.
So most of the book is the pieces of the being finding each other, right, sort of coming together.
Yep.
And so then the ending, at least in the book, because I believe what I read was More Than Human and not Baby is 3, they get sort of invited to join as like a society of higher beings.
Yeah.
Who also are like these sort of communal kind of beings. It kind of reminded me of Pamela Sargent's Watchstar. You've read that, where the societies.
Oh God, yeah.
The people of the society are all part of this like hive mind kind of thing. Not exactly, but sort of. But when you reject it, it rejects you. And so the main character ends up alone at the end, but she's made contact with like another larger hive mind that like spans planets and, and joins this bigger group. But it's people being attached to other people mentally, and they can't really exist without other people. And the big test in that book when you're a teenager is you're removed from the hive mind. Can you survive a couple of days alone? And most people don't. And then those that do manage to get re-invited back in. But but so in this one we still have this idea there's some sort of conglomeration of beings like this, and now they're like, hey, you managed to find all your pieces and you can come be with us now. Right.
Yeah, that I thought was clever. The idea that we have all these kind of fey examples of alternate humans, the telekinetics and the teleporters and all that, who just do these weird things, and some of them, learn how to control it, and some of them just go nuts, etc. And the idea that they're looking for their central processor, the brain, in order to come together as a single being. There's nothing in the story that suggests that this entity can't be any number of individual components that it wants to be. But unlike other science fiction writers, my take on the way Sturgeon presented this was he didn't think that this was a superior being. He just thought this was just another way of being, period. Not better, not worse, but deserving of its own needs. Because I think Sturgeon overall was very aware that people are mistreated all the time because they're different. And he thought that was a flaw in the human makeup. But that, of course, somebody like that could find themselves, so to speak, and if they have special powers, there's nothing to stop them from misusing it in order to get, exert a little payback for any misery they had. But like I said, unlike other writers, I don't think Sturgeon thought this was an advance. I read this story as an example of a mode of survival. And the only thing that makes them frightening is that they don't fit in with everybody else. And that was the other thing about Sturgeon. I think he was very much anti-conformist, that he saw conformity as essentially a stifling thing that hurt human progress rather than helped it. So, I mean, you can compare this to others. And earlier we were discussing, like, for instance, Arthur C. Clarke in Childhood's End. He thought the only way to evolve to a higher being is to give up your individual personality and join a great agglomeration of super beings, which I thought, I have a number of reactions to that. Very few of them complimentary. And I also don't think that if we did have telepathy on some level and we could make mental contact with others, I don't think it would change the way we interact, but I don't think it would change the ultimate result in terms of the benefit to the community. It's just talking without words, so to speak. And in one of my books, I took a swipe at the whole idea of it. I have some telepaths in my first novel, and it's a nanoprocessor technique and all that. But one of them says, in response to questions about how he does it, he says, "Believe me, it would be much simpler if you just told me what you're thinking, because messing around in all that brainware is just chaos." Which is why I think that telepathy, the way it is typically presented in a lot of science fiction, if there was a possibility for it existing, it was an evolutionary dead end, because I think it would have been too cumbersome for success. It would have just confused everybody. The lion would have feasted well that day, a whole bunch of hunters going out there and get all confused with each other's thoughts, and they just stand there. What do we do? But we like the idea of these things, that you can do things with your mind. I'll tell you, the thing that I always found fascinating is they never account in such things, like with telekinesis. I can move things with my mind. They never account for the energy. And I keep thinking, if you did that, if you picked up that boulder with your mind, the sweat would be pouring from you.
How many calories would you have to eat? Yeah.
Yeah, you would be burning calories like a train. Because as far as I know, that wouldn't have anything to do with, the three laws of thermodynamics. but it is often used to demonstrate superior ability and a cheap way to get it done. And I didn't see Sturgeon doing that particular trick in this. They all had to eat. They all slept a lot when they didn't eat. I think there's one throwaway line that says, they went hungry for a while and nobody would get out of bed. So this is one I think everybody should just go find a copy of it and look it up and take a look. It's also finely written. It just flows. The dialogue is a little dated because it was written in the early 50s, and so it kind of reflects the idiom of the day. But other than that, this is a very readable story from a contemporary point of view, I think. And he didn't actually put anything in it that dated it. There's no description of, he doesn't even describe a rotary phone on the desk. This could happen anywhen.
I guess there are like internal combustion vehicles, but I mean that's not real specific to a particular year or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is one of the great ones. This is one of the great ones, and I think we're overdue for, in general, a rediscovery of Theodore Sturgeon. I think he was remarkable in his day.
Right. Well, that sounds like a good recommendation. So if you want something to read, you can get More Than Human off of Amazon. I think you have to buy a used copy. So you could probably maybe also find one on Etsy or eBay or some of those used books, online used bookstores. I don't know which ones are still around. There used to be like 8 books and places like that. But you could probably find a used copy somewhere, or your local library may have a copy. Who knows? You can always check.
Let me put in a plug now for the online used bookstores, biblio.com.
All right, biblio.com.
Which is completely unaffiliated with Amazon, if that matters to you.
All right, cool. So biblio.com is a good place to start your search for either Baby is 3 or More Than Human, to learn the story of these separate people, but who are part of one sort of corporate entity, and the whole discovering process and how they come together and stay together, and all the people they kind of meet and affect while they're doing that. So thank you, Mark, for sharing your time today. And remember, if you like this episode, please hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.